21st December. My God. Where the hell did this month go? I'm going to be your host tonight, Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the shit kicker of nuclear, the nuclearproctologist.org for us common folks. And you can call in anytime. It's 709-589-4406. You can, but you won't. Call in or be square. Vote. It's Wednesday. It's up to you what you are. Hope everybody had a great day. Except for the nuclear industry, you sacks of shit. I hope for the nuclear industry. Should they change the name of the nuclear industry to the coward industry, I wonder? To the genocide industry? Yeah, there you go. Don't call it nuclear. No. Welcome all three people. You are fantastic. One of you is me. So all two people. Crushing it again tonight. After a decade, you too can have three people on your show. Only if you talk about nuclear, though. So the lunatic, batshit, crazy, kooky, whack jobs are growing food and harvesting right alongside 1-ton bags of radiation in Japan. And if you don't hold them accountable, they're going to do it everywhere else. And the food was banned by 55 countries in 14 prefectures. These are large prefectures. This is almost half the country. Well, Dan, I thought it was just Fukushima. Yeah, well. Thank you, lucky stars, you're not Japanese. 865,000 extra cancers by 2012. That's 1 year later, according to the Japanese National Cancer Center. A year after Fukushima. And cancer is just one of 1,800 illnesses. But don't worry, the industry hasn't forgot about you. They decided to surround all farms with nuclear power plants. Vice versa, we should say, I suppose. The farms are holding the nuclear power plants hostages, Dana. It's not the nuclear plant fault. I beg to differ. The nuclear industry put the plants there. So the radiation, because there's radiation fallout in all your nuclear plants. And from what we're seeing, this is symmetrical worldwide. The biggest majority, I'll go as high as saying 90% of the nuclear power plants, certainly at least that we looked at, are surrounded by farms worldwide. Now, that's either an incredible coincidence or they're trying to poison you. But Dana, surely they know the difference, and they do, actually. They know radiation, plants accumulate radiation, so they know that if you eat that particular plant that's surrounded or continuous radioactive fallout, the fuel pools are pools at this site where they put the reactor cores. The reactor cores are still splitting the atoms the same amount as you would boil water for 1 million homes, except it's not under 1,000, 2,000 psi, for instance, right? But it's still producing these atoms for millions of years. These atoms have no containment once you take it out of the reactor core. And so every day they have to replace 120,000 liters in a fuel pool. So imagine if your job was to pour in, by the liter, 120,000 liters each day into a fuel pool, because that's what it's going to evaporate. Now, each liter is a dirty bomb. It's got trillions of atoms, anthropogenic man-made atoms, that are catastrophic to everything with replicating cells. They're catastrophic. Particularly your children. Now, does that sound like a good idea? Come on, be reasonable. Does that even seem reasonable? Come on, it's a good idea. So they know the difference. They know that there's no such thing as a safe level. And when you say no such thing, even an atom, when it gets in your body, because you ate the radioactive food from the nuclear wasteland, your body is going to attack it immediately for the rest of your life with white blood cells. That's incredibly scary because your body has to displace a red blood cell to create a white blood cell. And the red blood cell carries oxygen nutrition. The white blood cell is only supposed to be temporary, day, week, 2 weeks, or something like that. So if you got a cut on your finger, your body attacks with white blood cells. And white blood cells are produced in all your joints, and you also have a spleen that's dedicated to making white blood cells. And so you get a cut on your hand, your nearest joint and joints, depending on the size of it, will produce white blood cells. So imagine if the cut never heals. Imagine if you get 1 million of these cuts. Because that's what radiation is like. Every second it's in your body, or wherever it's to, insects or birds or animals or children, it's pulsing energy every second. Almost at the speed of light, wrecking the chromosomes, the DNA, the organs, and everything else that it strikes. At almost the speed of light, at almost 186,000 miles per second. And it's going to do it every second for the rest of your life. And that there's 1,800 diseases will come along, typically before cancer, 2 of the 18, 10 of the 18 diseases. After a while, your immune system is so compromised, you're now susceptible and catastrophically the pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and benign could never hurt you. Foliage and root uptake of cesium, strontium, zirconium in processing tomato plants. So they know that plants suck up the radiation. Is that why all nuclear power plants, or the majority of them, are surrounded by farms? And that they know for a fact that the children's risk of cancer is at least 100 times higher than an adult with the same exposure. So it really makes you wonder why there's communities and why they're surrounded by farms. I hope it does. Anyway, it does to me. I don't know about you, but it certainly should. And that the drinking water, the farms, everything on both sides runs downhill to the drinking water, carries it downstream to the other communities, eventually to the oceans. It wrecks all the insects and all the fish in the ecosystem permanently for millions or billions of years. There is no redeeming qualities. Everything's bad. Every facet of the industry is terrible. And the industry can only exist by keeping you incompetent, keeping you incapable of using your voices, which, by the way, they're terrified of. If you're a homeless person in the worst circumstances, and you got access to a camera and you start talking about nuclear, the industry will come after them and try to exterminate them. It doesn't matter who you are, they're terrified of your voices. And just because you're homeless don't mean you're a bad person. It just means the industry finally destroyed you. Not just cancer, but how low doses of radiation causes heart diseases and strokes, and liver problems, and lung problems, and respiratory, and pituitary, and thyroid, and adrenaline, and Alzheimer's, and dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. Up to 1,800 known illnesses. There's nothing out there that, unfortunately, that I know about that competes with it. The industry has been prolific in the releases, and it's all intended to hurt all species. Unfortunately, this is not just a human thing. The species are infinitely more compromised by this disease factories, which is known as nuclear power plants. It's not a coincidence that most of the nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. It's not a coincidence that 11 becquerels a kilogram of cesium, you start to see heart problems, is not common knowledge. All they'll talk about is the word cancer. They don't see cancer, any increases of cancer, so therefore everything is good. And the people that say that, I disrespect them so much. So much that I likely would punch them out if I ever saw them. I have nothing but absolute contempt, which is just a fraction of what they have for you and all the species on the planet, I might add. We had a poll last night. Should nuclear scientists be held accountable for not trying to stop Fukushima? And if the world knew what was going on and you took that poll around the world, it would be unanimous 100%. The industry would pretend it's not, but everybody else on the planet would know the difference. And so the nuclear scientists know the difference. They're just evil. There's nothing else that can make any sense. Why surround nuclear plants on top of that with farms? When study after study after study showed it's a terrible idea. Why build nuclear power plants? And in this case, a reprocessing facility. In this case, they had a nuclear meltdown in 1957 that's still hemorrhaging into the environment, yet the farms are still pumping food out to the unsuspecting consumers, the victims. This can only be described one way as crimes against humanity. To grow food around a nuclear power plant. We've had polls where should it be a crime to sell the food from around nuclear power plants, almost 100%. Only a couple of idiots would vote no, and they're obviously idiots when anybody votes no to the right thing. Inhaling just one hot particle, inhaling it, breathing it, drinking it, consuming it, absorbing a single hot particle, and almost everything coming out of a nuclear meltdown, by the way, is a hot particle. So how is it that they don't know the difference? Because they know the difference. It's built there specifically to stop the bioaccumulation around the nuclear power plant by having the food distributed, shipped out. And they know the food is going out to the supermarkets. They have armed guards around this nuclear power plant, and anybody who's not a farmer is going to get stopped and harassed. Except for the farmers. They're the nuclear industry's best friend. They make it easy to poison people thousands of miles away. The truth is so inconceivably horrible, but it's still the truth. The influence of the development of temperate fruit tree species and the potential for their uptakes of radionuclides. There's zero possibility they don't know it's a horrifically terrible bad idea. 50 becquerels a kilogram in humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organs. Irreversible lesions. Look up the word irreversible sometime and see why I'm so upset. Not to the people that know any difference, obviously, but to the detractors that are not detractors, they're just a stump of the nuclear industry. How is it possible that this is an accident when the majority of nuclear power plants are built in prime farmland, and that is common knowledge in the industry of how terrible radioactive fallout actually is? 100 becquerels a kilogram of cesium, and to only include cesium should be a crime. To suggest cesium is the only thing you got to worry about should be a crime. To say that out loud and they say that it's strictly to deceive you, strictly to help drop your defenses, so that you poison yourself and your loved ones and your children and your friends and the vulnerable people in your communities and your families. They know this. 50 becquerels a kilogram in humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organ. Well, obviously you can't stop that much from bioaccumulating in the food because the plants are hemorrhaging radiation all the time. And the dumps, the decades, it was over 3 decades where the nuclear industry went out and dumped it into the ocean. High-level waste, fuel assemblies, reactor cores. Russia has 18,000 dumps in the Arctic and the ex-Soviet Union. And it's in prime breeding fishing grounds on top of that. They build their farms and their plants, and they build their dumps in places surrounded by farms so they can poison you. Japan has taken it to a whole different level. Japan has grown food alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation in a nuclear no-go zone, an exclusion zone, and then shipping it to market. There's nothing, the industry doesn't have a redeeming quality, nothing. It's the most polluting industry in history. It needs 2 external power supplies just to run. Every facet of it screams that it shouldn't exist. All your universities, the schools of mass destruction, spend an enormous amount of time in the last 80 years trying to convince you that everything is hunky-dory when they absolutely knew the difference. They hoodwinked you so they can poison everybody and everything. You know, there's more to this planet than humans, and I don't see the stewards of this planet. Greenpeace is not your steward. Greenpeace is humanity's enemy. The traitor's hideous Greenpeace. You're probably going to hear some slurping, sue me. Woo, that's so hot. Perfect. $134 cesium-85 strontium in fruit plants. So they got all these studies. They know the difference. They're not naive. They're not gullible. You are. We are. In a normal world, we would burn this place to the ground. But I can't because it's full of nuclear waste. I'm just going to liberate it into the environment. To call them scumbags is appropriate. Top cancer doctor, nuclear radiation, the most carcinogenic thing that exists. So why are power plants surrounded by farms? Because that's as evil as they could be. They couldn't be any more eviler than that. This was the pinnacle of evil as far as they were concerned. So they went for it. And now we're paying for it. And the cancer cluster started in the 70s. Or the cancer epidemic, which is just one of 1,800 illnesses and diseases. Smalling mascot asked the Fukushima kids to gargle to stay safe from radiation. That mascot should have been set on fire. Radioactive sparkles and happy children. Smiling mascot. This was The Economist, one of the big medias. The Economist told the same story. Children should play outside and just gargle when they came home. Don't worry about the radiation. It only comes to sad people. Pure voodoo. And I don't see the world fighting back. I don't see the world making progress. I see the nuclear industry just get perpetually evil because there's no incentive for them not to be evil. Obviously. They have no illusions that they're poisoning you. They have no illusions that this is wrong. They have no illusions that, and they tell you, all they mention to you is cancer. And some other illnesses. There's 1,800. It's not some others. It's, oh my God. Cesium-137 immediately damages the heart muscles. It's not slow acting. if you're in a nuclear wasteland and you're eating the food and breathing the air and drinking the water, a heart attack is around the corner. For real. It blows me away that the fresh water is flowing down to the other communities. That's an ecosystem. It's not just a river, not just water, it's an ecosystem. And they despise it. They despise you. Why else would they be surrounded by farms? Cesium, again the word, every time you hear the word cesium, I want to punch a nuclear scientist out. Modeling of cesium-137 vertical soil transfer by a tree root system. They know exactly what they're doing. They got no illusions. They hate you and all the species beyond anything conceivable. Hollywood can't depict it. They're so hateful. Nuclear radiologists, don't be fooled by paid industry consultants. The low doses of ionizing radiation do cause cancer. Yeah, but what about heart problems and liver problems and lung problems and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid, and which is endless illnesses. Once you radiate the thyroid, you're producing radioactive hormones. That on its own means nuclear shouldn't exist. You can't contain it. You got 1,000 fuel pools hemorrhaging into the environment 24 hours a day. Long after the plant closes, it'll still be doing it. The evidence is so overwhelming. And what do you get when you tell the truth? Fat lip, black eye. Hello, everybody. You got 13 people. 13. 13 likes. 19 votes. And then, of course, the industry got to come in and vote yes. They're not ashamed. They're proud. They got to come in and lie to you. The industry is full of just incredible monsters, and there's the proof that someone would come in and vote opposite of reality. Again, cesium-137. As if nothing else is coming out of there. It's an absurd lie. It's absurd. Health physicists in the U.S. worries about inhaling hot particles from Fukushima, uranium, plutonium. Really? Not cesium? 16,000 homeless and destitute and victims of society have quit. Not nuclear scientists, not nuclear academics, not nuclear institutions or universities. The nuclear students should work there. And that would be the end of the nuclear industry pretty quick, wouldn't it? Because in a couple of years when they graduate, they're not going to hesitate to poison you. I've had people sympathize. Well, Dana, they don't know any better. Well, they do. You can't defend monsters just because they haven't graduated yet. You're making a fatal mistake. 1 million becquerels a square meter over the west coast turned out to be 20 million. And then in another study turned out to be 220 million per liter of rainfall. So goodbye insects. Yeah, it's going to take a few years before it finally plays out, but it's goodbye insects. Goodbye phytoplankton. Goodbye to all the species. Goodbye to the species that are dependent upon the insects. So we can have nuclear poison us at our sources. And so it's not even safe to go to a supermarket anymore. How can you defend that? How can you be that stupid and that cowardly that you could defend it? How? It's easy. You never did have emotions. You never were all there. Do you think this is somehow an accident that these nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. Does anybody really believe that? Does anybody really think that this is accidental? Just a total coincidence, Dana. It's a total coincidence. Such a coincidence. Let's see if I can find it. Which, by the way, I don't believe in coincidences anymore after coming across the nuclear industry for all these years. This is not an accident. This is not a coincidence. It's a genocide. You got so-called journalists, so-called medias, pretending they're in a building that don't even exist. Like the evilness of nuclear never seems to abate. It never takes a break. It just keeps getting eviler. They said, don't compare Chernobyl to Fukushima. But Chernobyl didn't have fuel pools at the top of the building. It was a brand new reactor, just a couple of years old. These guys had 4 decades of reactor cores stored at the top of the buildings. At least 2 of them are completely stumped, just stumps left. And they tricked and manipulated and deceived you. And it's easy because your defenses are compromised by the radioactive food they're shipping out of there. It's an industry of scumbags. It's an industry that's trying to exterminate, and will successfully too, exterminate everything, all species, bacteria and the fungus. It'll leave nothing left. There'll be no carbon left on the planet whatsoever. Nothing. It's officially, completely, and utterly out of control. Canada lifted all restrictions after 93 days from the nuclear wasteland, while 55 other countries banned it for a decade. So they couldn't ship it anywhere, only Canada. And they did. Because being evil is natural for the people in the nuclear industry. The inbreeds, the inbreeds, the inbreeds. And you're not safe where you're to. This is a 16-day model of the radioactive fallout. 16 days. And guess what happened? Your whole planet was covered in radioactive fallout. Do you think it stopped? This is a continuous, excuse me. It's a continuous plume covering the entire planet after 16 days. That's France's model. I got lots of models. Which one do you need? If you're still on the fence, which one do you need? What country? Boris Johnson removed all restrictions on baby food and cereal, which, who eats the most cereal in your house? The kids, right? Boris Johnson removed all restrictions 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, on baby food and cereal from the nuclear wasteland, from ground zero. This year, one of the last things he's done was remove restrictions on the rest of the country for everybody else. Why would you remove restrictions for children first of something so toxic that the American industry describes radioactive fallout as 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison? And why didn't they have scientists explain this? Why did they have Boris the Monster Johnson, the most disgusting human possible, do it? And why did he revel in saying, I look forward to having it in all the corner shops and supermarkets in the entire country? Why do journalists hate us so much? These are important questions. I got nobody to ask it to. I'm asking you. Why do they lie like this? All of them. Every one of them. Most nights we'll cover today's headlines in the nuclear industry, and this is what they're going to tell you. Their job is to make sure that as many as they can convince to turn them completely incompetent. Let's cover some news for today. I don't know if I can stomach it, but let's cover some. I'm trying not to wig out. Forgive me if I do. Japan to extend compensation for the Fukushima #1 disaster. After several years, you threw not everybody, but the majority of people off any kind of compensation. There's only a small fraction left. Most of these would have been friendly to the industry, friendly to the government. But the normal people, they were thrown off it a long time ago, years ago. We covered it. So they're not actually being honest at all. Lose your house, lose your home, lose your properties. Can't go back to your graveyards. You were poisoned because they evacuated you way too late. And they sit around this room where they can barely see each other and make these incredible claims that they're going to compensate the victims. You can't compensate the poison that you caused them and continue to cause them. And that'll go on for thousands of generations. SLOWPOKE playground park to be built in Japan's Kagawa prefecture. That's a model of another one they built in Fukushima prefecture, not too far from the nuclear meltdowns. Japan's Fukushima prefecture opened the nation's very first Chansey park. Japan's Fukushima prefecture, which wasn't very far from the nuclear meltdown. You got farmers growing food with Geiger counters, showing high levels of radiation and saying, well, the government's lying to us, but they still grow the food, they still ship it to market. And the government's happy to take it and make sure it gets sold or shipped to countries that don't know or knows better. Our contaminated future. Our contaminated future. And Fukushima communities are adapting to a life in a time of permanent radioactive fallout. They call it pollution for some reason. A glimpse of what's to come for us all. He actually takes a Geiger counter and shows the high level of radiation and says, see, the government's lying. Now, leave me alone. I got to go harvest some of my food for the children. They love my food. They love to be poisoned. Regulators, nuclear regulators reflect on lessons learned 10 years on from Fukushima. And the despicable sack of shit from the nuclear energy mouthpiece, we cover this guy regular, by the way. And the people in the audience are plants. They're there to ask the silly question, is it safe? Well, of course it's safe. We're the nuclear industry. We got the best of the best of the best. I can assure you, after all these years, I guarantee it, with no reserve whatsoever, that everybody in the IAEA and the NRC are actual real-life goblins. These are actually monsters. Safety first must be a priority for Fukushima water. Safety first. Safety first. They want you to think what might happen, not what has happened. And that's how they win. And winning is murder. How do we murder everything in increments over time? This is another model of radioactive fallout. This model stops at 19 days right here. Whole planet's covered in radiation. Pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second. By the way, that's called global warming. Gas, oil, and coal emissions don't create plumes like that. Nuclear is the only thing that creates the plumes that covers the entire planet. The barrels were built to trick you, manipulate you, and deceive you. And I got full episode presentations, multiple ones, in my playlist under tanks. And if you watch that, you'll see with all the evidence you could ever hope for, certainly enough to convict them in court, that they poisoned the ocean every day non-stop for almost 12 years. Not to mention the radioactive fallout covered all the planet in 19 days, meaning the oceans too. New Zealand and the Pacific surged to step up against the Japanese nuclear plant. So what you're seeing, headlines like this and headlines like this, right, is to build resistance for something that's already happened, but pretend it didn't. Oh, it might happen. A fake anti-nuclear rally is what they're pulling off here. And they got the media. And they got the media, you know the media, the ones that pretend that they're in a building that don't exist, at their fingertips to convince you worldwide. That should be reassuring. Here they are pretending in 2013 being in a building that don't even exist. Try making that up on your own. Try making that up on your own. I double dare you. Ministry plans test on reusing Fukushima soil in Tokyo. So they picked up 30 million one-ton bags of radiation. Now they're going to grow food with it. Well, that's the short of it. That's exactly what they're doing. Oh, and right now they're currently growing it in a no-go zone. In a community is so radioactive nobody can live there. They took a lot of the soil there, split it open, they're growing food in it. And it's perfectly safe, Dina. Oh, it's just a couple of miles away from ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns. Try dreaming that up on your own. Try coming up with something that is seriously, monstrously evil on your own. Try it. Like, this is not even conceivable pre-Fukushima for any of these headlines, by the way. Now it's normal. Now what's the big whoop? Turkey in talks with U.S. to buy American nuclear reactors. America don't build reactors. What are you talking about? The last reactor they brought online was Watts Bar. It took 43 years. The Green Party statement on emergency shutdown of Point Lepreau nuclear power station in New Brunswick, Canada. This is an old, decrepit plant that this year got a 10-year extension. They wanted 25 years, but even the nuclear industry wasn't so crazy to give them 25 years. But that's what they wanted, 25 years. And they know that they're the last ones that deserve a 25-year extension, but they were pinning for it. They were trying hard. They had a lot of people on their side, too. The industry still done the wrong thing and gave them a 10-year extension. There is no checks and balances for these people. So if they have an accident, and they've had lots, there's zero possibility they're going to warn the communities. because that's going to put a couple of thousand people out of a job. You can't tell the truth. You're going to put all these people out of a job. The community can't survive. Now it needs the plant. X Energy completes key safety system prototype for the XE, which is xenon. XE is abbreviation for xenon. And xenon is a hideous radioactive fallout. And xenon and krypton and curium isotopes are some of the biggest byproducts of the radiated fuel rods. So they call their reactor a Xenon 100. Shows this incredible contempt. This unbelievable, hideous, monstrous contempt. This incredibly insidious to use that for a name. It's an industry that's never, ever had an incentive not to be evil. It's an industry that is, its entire legacy is predicated upon evil. I know I'm preaching to the choir because we only got 14 people, 18 people on the show. That we've been doing for a decade. How's that even possible? The estimated 7.4 billion euros project, a USD project to complete 2 units. Is there anybody on the planet thinks they can actually build that for 7.4 billion US? 2 reactors. Well, like, this is the lie, right? They come in and tell you they're going to build it for this price, and every year after that, it's going to increase by 30%. Until it's at least triple or quadruple the original budget. That's how they do it, right? That's what makes them tick. The World Nuclear News, who hates humans and species like they're aliens, and look how they promote China. The World Nuclear News. It don't matter where you're to, including North Korea. And North Korea hasn't attacked anybody in 70 years. America and Britain hasn't stopped. America's got almost 900 bases worldwide. North Korea has none. They need a boogeyman, and they'll sacrifice every man, woman, and child in the country to have one. Curb your nuclear enthusiasm. The fusion story that came out on the 13th of December was unbelievable. It was proliferated everywhere constantly. You couldn't find a TV channel, I bet you. There was nowhere on the internet you can go in a news site where the top headline to your right or left was going to be nuclear fusion breakthrough. But this was weapons. This was Los Alamos National Laboratory. This wasn't power. This was about weapons. And we know that because it's from Los Alamos National Laboratory. It's a complete fiction. But the stocks for the industry climbed through the roof since the 13th. Thanks to the disgusting, despicable, vicious propaganda. The nuclear industry, that's how they roll. That's how they make it work. They got the media and the universities at their fingertip, willing, ready, and able. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a shit about you. Radiation protection aspects of decommissioned activities, nuclear power plant, Nuclear Energy Institute, which is the very last people on the planet anybody should even trust for a second. If they're driving a car down the road and they stop to let you cross at a crosswalk, at a red light, there's zero possibility I'll cross. I won't do it. They absolutely, positively, unequivocally can't be trusted. If it's 12 o'clock noon and somebody asks them what time it is, and they say it's 12 o'clock noon, I'm going to check the time myself. There's zero possibility I'll trust them. The industry attracts the worst of the worst, and it has a lot of them because they inbreed. And so their children are guaranteed a job in that industry. And you know they're going to be completely dysfunctional without human emotions. They're going to be raised to hate your guts and despise you, have nothing but contempt for you, and sabotage your country and your health and your supermarkets. While the U.S. looks for space for nuclear waste, 80 years of looking for space. 80 years of looking for a solution. And you can't put it anywhere unless they get your permission, because you want to put it in your back garden, in your farmland, of course. 80 years, and they still can't come up with a solution. Do you really believe that? Do you really think that's possible? Do you really think that all the universities on the planet can't come up with a solution after 80 years? The problem is the waste is still splitting the atom into your environment, and they don't want it to stop. They hate you, and they hate your planet, and they hate your species. And they made 99.9% of the population incompetent with the poison that they fed them for all these years. The Millstone Nuclear Power Station and other power stations across the US of A. The U.S. Department of Energy is reviewing how to resite nuclear waste in willing towns, in communities that will accept it, and cities, while a permanent national storage location is found. They're not even looking. The only one they come up with was a pilot project. They got rid of the project and put it in plant and called it Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. And then they had a meltdown in 2014. They covered that up. And I made a video and explained it. The local TV in New Mexico chopped up my video, put out a clip of me telling facts, and said I was a lawyer. What do you call me? A conspiracy theorist. And I still absolutely resent him for doing that. We unequivocally have the documentation showing this was an event. This was a nuclear event. They spent $6 billion, pretend it was a truck fire, and everybody can get sick and fucking die. Fuck you. In a willing community, Nuclear Engineering International. So you would think this is a fine, upstanding media, right? Who never puts their name on a story. That should worry you. And the U.S., the NRC has accepted TRISO-X application for mixed oxide fuel highly enriched one fabrication facility in the United States, which is illegal under the current Constitution of the United States, I might add. But the former nuclear waste, one of the nuclear waste energy government agencies, Sam Bristol, in increments since 2017 has whittled away the law, so they're able to now do it. And it just got arrested for stealing luggage, expensive luggage from the airports. And this is what the fabled building is going to look like. I really despise them when they do that, by the way, when they put out these renditions of this hype. This Nuclear Engineering International is not a media, it's a nuclear lobbying group. And a very, 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 very influential and powerful one. Full of scum and degenerates and monsters. It's not hard to find them. Just got to look at the nuclear industry. The Idaho National Laboratory celebrates the anniversary of nuclear power electricity. Idaho National Laboratory celebrates the anniversary. So, in this day in 1951, their reactor, what they call a breeder reactor no less, lit up 4 light bulbs. Thanks to Enrico Fermi. Who I hope one day to be able to visit his grave so I can piss on it. Out in the eastern Idaho desert sits a powerful link to the past. Inside this old-time building sits the experimental breeder reactor. Well, if it sits there, it's because it's melted down and then they can't get near it. Myanmar, which is a war-torn country, and current administration is lunatic and evil, is now, again, claiming Russia's going to get them small modular reactors that don't even exist. Here's a goose that lays golden eggs. Give me everything you got. Sign it all over my name. Okay, sir. Fordham presses ahead with small modular reactor plans, but they don't even have a design into the industry. They don't have a design, rather, into the regulatory agencies, which is the first requirement. There's a million pieces of paper. They're pressing ahead, so give us all you got. Give us all the money. We're going to build it when everybody's... So put all this energy and fable into this small modular reactor that doesn't exist, won't exist, has no hope to exist. The rules and regulations are so cumbersome that they claim they can't exist. The industry is, well, we can't build a reactor if we can't release the radiation into the environment. They're supposed to build the reactors to contain the radiation. And they said, well, we can't do it. But they're going to be safer and cheaper, and they're not. And quicker, and they're not. But there's enough idiots out there that'll support it, because they interbreed with each other. B-2 nuclear bomb fleet is temporarily grounded due to safety issues. So the new, latest, greatest genocide machine is grounded. Ah, I'm so heartbroken. Further Flameville delays echo problems at a Kukuluktuk 3, which is in Finland, I believe. This is a French EPR reactor. That these things are 4 times the price they originally quoted and 12 years behind the original launch date with no end in sight. They keep saying, no, well, I got to spend more money. That's okay. Has been further delayed, and that's the estimate's cost has also increased. It was supposed to be $3.4 billion. Now it's $13.2 billion. And anytime they tell you you're going to build a reactor for like these big fancy new engineer reactors for $3.4 billion, you know they're lying. You know that. There's zero possibility they can do it. Now it's $13.2 billion. And the cost was originally at $3.2 billion. Now it's $13.2 billion. The very top, the third line from the top, $13.2 billion, $14 billion U.S. America's top secret plot to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon. A hydrogen one too, not just any old nuclear bomb. To make Soviet Union. This was tit for tat with the Soviet Union. We really do got to get rid of politicians. We desperately got to get rid of politicians. The minute they get power, the industry has already... Well, the industry got them the job because they're corrupted. And so as soon as they get the authority, they don't give a fuck about your country. They'll do whatever the industry tells them. They'll spend whatever the industry tells them. Whatever the military-industrial complex, also known as United Nations, tell them. Look at this symbol. You tell me these people are not kooky, batshit, lunatic crazy? Geothermal is your solution. Geothermal is the way forward. Geothermal is the only thing that's going to do the job. Geothermal should have been doing the job all along. It's just drill a hole down, tap into it. You got energy for the next million years. You don't got to bring in any commodities. You don't got to bring in gas, oil, and coal, or disgusting nuclear. Why didn't that take off? Because at some point, that's what you're going to be using worldwide, isn't it? Now they say by 2050, 50% of the energy worldwide is going to be geothermal. Because it's so stupidly easy. Federal funds come to New Mexico nuclear waste site. Of course it is. Despite the fact that money already existed for this. And a nuclear waste site is not going to be a nuclear waste site. National labs, as bill passes Congress. Of course it does. It's nuclear industry to get whatever they want. And you're not going to do anything with it. 90% of their money goes to administration, not to construction, not to actual physical projects. 90% of the money the nuclear industry gets allocated goes to the administration. So they can hire more inbreeds and get bigger and consume everything. Eventually they got to consume everything. And now they figure they can do it without you, so they're exterminating you. Swedes should prepare for unprecedented power cuts. Because they didn't build in any redundancy. Nuclear industry ran the country for decades, right? And so when the nuclear industry takes over your country, it excludes everything. Case in point, Canada, Ontario, Canada, last year, closed down over 700 renewable projects. 700. Because they were directly competing with the nuclear industry, so they got rid of them. There was $4.2 billion allocated in Canada for renewable energies to have storage. Bruce Power last year got all $4.2 billion of it allocated to their nuclear power site to build storage for something that doesn't need storage, because he didn't want the renewable industry to have proof of concept. The forgotten atomic scientist. My opinions of atomic scientists is they're the lowest forms of life possible. They know the difference. December 21st, 1982, 40 years ago, government denies report on proposed strike against Pakistan nuclear facilities. So, like, if you attack a nuclear facility, you're going to have a catastrophic event. It's worse than a nuclear war. You might as well have a nuclear war than attack the nuclear facility. This is a fictional story about a polluted place in Ontario, Canada. It's a book, The King of Hope, by Kim Conklin. King of Hope is a dark and heavy first novel about a town plagued by nuclear waste. A town plagued by diseases and illnesses and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. The town is a fictionalized version of Port Hope, Ontario. So it's not a fiction where they do name another name, but it's a true story. They just don't want to, for legal reasons, because the nuclear industry is anal, don't want to give the industry an opportunity to try to stop it. The town is a fictionalized version of Port Hope, Ontario, a community that served as a center for radium and uranium processing for decades, beginning in the dirty 30s. And the dirty 30s never stopped for Port Hope. And we've covered Port Hope many times over the years. What they done to Port Hope with pollution was absurd. And then the tailing was used to build sidewalks and schools and malls and everything else. It's so evil, and they knew what they'd done. There was a chance to make a buck, a chance they didn't have to take care of it for 1,000 years, and they went for it. And there's no one to hold them accountable, even when the truth come out. Well, the government will clean it up. That's the industry's favorite sentence, by the way. Over those decades, radioactive material spread throughout the town due to leaking, dumping, and practice of using the waste as construction fill. The ultimate betrayal, isn't it? And everywhere you see these plants, you'll see that same facet, that same process being used to poison the community, the host victims. They're true parasites, right? The contamination eventually became the stuff of gothic horror. It's actually worse than that. Thus, this subgenre is perfectly suited to a tale inspired by the tragedy of Port Hope. Well, it's not just Port Hope, it's every community on that river, all the way to the Atlantic. It's absurd. And evaporation from all the tailing ponds. Conklin's fictional version of Port Hope is called Port d'Esprit. And like the real place, it's a quaint lakeside town known for its Victorian homes, natural beauty, and wildlife. Because that's what the industry hates the most, by the way, is wildlife. Like many of the town's children, they've been battling severe illnesses. Think about that statement. Like many of the town's children, they're battling severe illnesses. Like the irony of that sentence is absurd. The hardest thing for her is being a 14-year-old girl without hair. And while the town as a whole faces the momentous decision of whether to allow a third nuclear plant to be built within its borders, the new plant would recycle the hot metal waste produced by the other two. They're not evil. They're too evil to be called just evil. And a company spokesman admits there would be inevitably be radioactive emissions. Well, there's always, constantly, relentlessly radioactive emissions. It just never stops. It never. And it's a great story. You should read it. I'll bring the headline back up to you one more time. It's based on it's a fictional name, but on a real community. Just the industry is so powerful, they have to use a fictional name when it's a real story. Oppenheimer was vacated but not vindicated. Oppenheimer was crucified. They crucified him. They wanted to take over, right? Like Teller and Lawrence, there's many of them involved. Teller and Lawrence led the charge. They wanted the power. They wanted that key position. They got it too. And he'd done it in such a disgusting way, such a cowardly way. The industry is notorious for it when you look at the legacy of the history of nuclear. That's what nuclear is good at. It's good, really good. It's exceptional at being evil. That's the fake Rockefeller, or fake Oppenheimer. I was reading comments. Lack of greed level battery storage holding back green investments. What are you talking about? Why would you look at batteries for grid level storage? Why wouldn't you look at the 20 other options that are available? Why would you use batteries? That technology might never come to fruition. And it shouldn't. There's too many better options out there. The idea of batteries is to discourage the renewable industry. And I didn't read that story because we're about to go live. I didn't read this story because we're about to go live. Is Kyiv trying to incite a direct NATO-Russian war? Yeah, of course they are. They've done that from the very beginning, where they screamed for NATO to create a no-fly zone around Ukraine, which would have been a full-on war, because NATO's not supposed to exist. And we got a massive poll tonight for everybody. We got 21 likes tonight. What the hell? An hour in, we only got 21 likes? How is that even possible? I've never even seen it that low at 1 hour in. Can nuclear power plants exist without contaminating everything with radioactive fallout worldwide? And the answer, of course, is no. All nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment from the fuel pools all the time. It never stops. Fukushima radioactive aerosol dispersal, for instance, that's just part way through the 40-day radioactive fallout. Here's the full one. So that's NOAA's model of the radioactive fallout. I'm going to speed it up so you can see the difference, right? So at the end of it, it looks like that. But the media put out just a fraction of it, right? Whereas the real numbers covers the whole planet. That's 40 days later. And this one is 20 days later. This model is plutonium-239 covering the whole planet. This model is the neptunium-239 covering the whole planet. By the way, 239's got about an 87-day half-life. And then it decays to, yeah, you guessed it, plutonium-239. The original projections of the radioactive fallout were spot on by most countries. This one is basically just covering the Pacific Ocean. I'm going to fast forward that in a second. It's 200 times the speed. And what's the date? This is the 31st. So this is 20 days later. It doesn't stop at 20 days. It's a continuous plume covering the entire planet. It never stops. Like the plutonium, like the neptunium, like the xenons, like the cesium-137 models. And there's so many of them, and the worst part is they're all accurate. And we've done research expeditions from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. And the species to your left were wiped out. We went back year after year, the species didn't recover. So is nuclear worth that trade-off? Was it worth it to exterminate all these species to your left so we can have dirty nuclear to finish off the planet? Was it worth it to exterminate the tidal zones from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska, where there's 27,000 islands? Was that worth it? Was nuclear worth it? Is it worth it to grow food in the nuclear wastelands right alongside of 1-ton bags, millions of 1-ton bags, so we can have nuclear? Was it worth it to increase an extra 865,000 cancers in the first year after the nuclear meltdown to keep nuclear? I hope the answer was no. Of course, the International Atomic Energy Agency is the last thing you want to trust. They're perpetual liars, the perpetual coward murder industry, the current generation included. So, like Tokyo, which is 220 kilometers away from Fukushima, after a single rainfall, they had 29,000 becquerels a square meter in the soil. You're supposed to evacuate. That's game over. You're supposed to run away, never come back. Nuclear fallout will engulf Taiwan starting April the 6th. People should stay home. Well, it hit Canada, United States, on March. It happened. The meltdowns happened on March the 12th, the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th. There was detonations and explosions. So, March the 16th, tack 10 days on that, and Canada and the United States was covered in radioactive fallout, and we have safeguards they're looking for. We pay them. We gave them the education. We gave them the monitoring. We gave them the authority. We gave them the equipment to look for it and warn us, and they didn't. They lied to us. They didn't tell us to stay home. They done the opposite. This is a good day to have your children to go out and play. Taiwan said people should stay home, take off their clothing, get rid of it, get showers. South Korea sent home children from 130 schools because of radioactive fallout. Yet in California, it wasn't 10 times more radioactive. It was 20 million times more. I showed you that a little while ago. The xenon, remember that fuel company, they're going to make their new reactor fuel is going to be XE. 133 in Washington was 450,000 times above detection levels, and it persisted for weeks. Well, it didn't go away. It doesn't just last. They're talking about the big part of the plume, persisted. So it was impossible not to breathe it, not to eat it, not to drink it, not to consume it, and particularly for the species that live outdoors all the time. In the future, the entire planet will be seeking revenge against the nuclear industry. It'll be way too little and way too late, but it's coming. That's a fact. That's not perhaps, that's not maybe, that's a guarantee, that's a given. The world will come for the nuclear industry. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be anarchy. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram. I will show you so much information that you can't deny it. Nuclear scientists don't deny it, they just won't admit it. Massive radioactive releases, Fukushima going on for almost 3 years. Well, that's the same 3 years where the filtration systems never worked? Yeah. Oh, okay. Map shows Fukushima fallout in the United States. Radiation doses in the northeast and Great Lakes were equal to the west coast, which was obviously brutal. Up to 220 million atoms in one study alone. That's some horrific censorship tonight, man. Wow. UN experts say radiation from Fukushima will have no negative health effect. But UN is a corporation created after the League of Nations. In the bowels of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And now has been weaponized against every country worldwide. It's 195 militaries. It's Eisenhower called them the military-industrial complex. George W. Bush called them the New World Order. Doomsday-like radiation releases of fire in a pool at Unit 4 to be a global catastrophe. Well, that's Unit 4 over there. It's gone. Don't try to tell the truth, though. By the way, Reactor 3 is gone, too. And when you ran out of homeless, all you had left was a stump, which they claimed was perfect shape and got the fuel out of the pool that were at the top of the buildings, which doesn't even exist. It's just, I'm confused why the world is not fighting back. I'm humiliated the world is not fighting back. I'm humiliated that the universities are schools of mass destruction, and they were in a position to fight back and didn't. They were taken over by the industries in increments over decades, same as your government, same and bought up by your medias. And your media hates your guts. They fake being in the buildings, for goodness sakes. You got no one to turn to in the academic world. You got Helen Caldicott, who wrote 14 anti-nuclear books trying to convince you in interview after interview that everything is hunky-dory.
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Do you think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in, saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
But it doesn't. You can't make it look pristine. Nobody can, no matter how tidy. This is Helen Caldicott. Beyond nuclear. Right? They created that beyond nuclear so they can stab you everywhere, officially. There's 15 reactors in the quake zone that couldn't go into cold shutdown, by the way. Who knows how much fuel was washed out of these facilities? Because one thing about the industry, it's extremely efficient at lying and deceiving and manipulating. Radiation data from Seattle survey may be withheld by the feds for national security purposes. Well, like, what are you talking about? Radiation data from Seattle. The radioactive fallout was so catastrophic they couldn't tell the public who paid for it, who created it, that organization to find it and warn them. And when it happened, they said, well, yeah, we can't do our job because we're afraid we won't have a job after. So if we tell you the truth, you might want to get rid of nuclear, so we're not telling you nothing. I showed you it was 450,000 times above anything it should have been. And it persisted for weeks. They decided to hide it. Radiation levels around Fukushima are in levels where humans vomit uncontrollably and hair can be stripped from the body. Oh, and where they grow food and ship it worldwide to poison you too. With catastrophic revolts. The radiation levels around the plants were so high that helicopters couldn't dump water on the spent fuel rods. Which meant humans couldn't go near it, which meant to melt it down. It only melts down once and then it's gone. You don't get to go in after. You don't get to go in when it's happening either. When it breaks down, you run away. You don't try to fix it. It's a coward. It's an industry of nothing but cowards. It's an absurd industry of cowards. It's a monstrosity of cowards. $13,640 children out of 40,000 with thyroid cysts and small tumors. Girls are 4 times more vulnerable.
まさに今そこに元気な人が死んでいくんだよね。
But there's clear evidence rates have risen. Before the disaster in 2011, the rate of thyroid cancer was between 1 and 2 cases in every million children.
Now it's 13,646 out of 40,000. When you scale it up, it's equal to 358,000 out of a million. Pre-Fukushima was 1 to 2 per million. You got congenital heart disease gone through the roof. So 14.2% increase in the number of operations per 100,000 live births is 14,200 children have to have open heart surgery out of 100,000 across the entire country, which means the whole country is catastrophically poisoned. So they're just growing food and shipping it everywhere else. Canada lifted all restrictions on those prefectures after 93 days. 55 countries kept the restrictions for a decade and then got replaced by pro-nuclear, and then they removed the restrictions. Currently there's 14 with restrictions. But you wouldn't want to lift the restrictions for at least 1 million years. It's not gone away in 10 years. It's absurd. It's an industry of disgusting people, an industry of nothing but despicable cowards, an industry of nothing but monsters. The industry is nothing but monsters. There is nobody good in the industry. There's not a single person in the industry that gives a shit about the species or humans. The regulatory agencies are appointed because they're so evil. They have a legacy of so much evil. That's why they got the job in the regulatory organizations. They're not elected, they're appointed. Got a poll, we're going to close it. Can nuclear power plants exist without contaminating everything with radioactive fallout worldwide? And at the beginning of it, I explained to you by using farms. No, they can't. We got a stunning 93% of the people voted. That's all we got for tonight. I guess tomorrow night's the last show before Christmas. And Christmas is on Sunday when I normally do the first show of the week, right? So I got to try to remember not to do a show on Christmas. Like, I hate the industry so much. It's going to be an incredible test of willpower not to do a show on Christmas. And starting on Boxing Day, hopefully, according to what I've got done so far, we're going to do a recap of 2022 each day. And then on New Year's Eve, there's going to be a spectacular. I don't know if I can pull it off, but I'm going to be trying. And I've got a tendency to focus on things, so we're probably going to pull it off. We're going to try to cover 12 months of 5 shows a week and condense it down into 6 days. So it's going to be a lot of fun, actually, because it's hard to appreciate all the news we cover each year. It's probably impossible, actually. There's so much and so much variety. And I got to skim through all of it. Just the thought of it makes me just want to give up. But it's a challenge, and I'm pretty good with challenges. You're talking about an absurd amount of work I got to pull off for 6 days. Or is it 6 days? The 25th to the 31st, yeah. Well, no, 26, so 5 days. Oh, God. So it's even worse. I got to try to pull it off in 5 days. I might have to do a show on New Year's Day, January the 1st. If I pulls this off, right, from December 26th to January the 1st, I'm probably going to have to take a week off and sleep for a couple of days and try to get oriented again. And it's all good. James Lucid donated a whopping 200 last night. Thank you, James. My goodness. Hope everybody had a great day, if that's possible. So we started the show off night with 3 people. How's tomorrow night going to be? 2 people? I still got to do the shows. No matter what the industry censors me down to, I still got to do the show. I'm not allowed to falter because there's nobody else to replace us. And the truth, there has to be a beacon of light in this storm somewhere, and that's what we're doing. And unfortunately, the candle is burning at both ends, and so I don't want to burn my fingers, so as long as we're moving, don't burn my fingers. That was a good show tonight. A little awkward. I had a little problem getting started on time. We did show up on time, but my system didn't freeze up on me. Because remember, I started up a new session, right? We've been using the other session for over a year. And that was a super amount of work to get everything imported and set up. And oh my God, I still haven't got everything sorted out. But yeah, good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Thank you, everybody. Hugs for everybody. See everybody tomorrow night, last show before Christmas. I'll try to go easy tomorrow night. Looks like we got slaughtered tonight, 29 likes. 29 likes, we probably only got 50 views or something. That's censorship gone crazy, right? Like the industry didn't expect someone like me to show up at some point. And like, how can you have an industry with no opposition? And the only opposition we found out there, public that we're talking about, right? The stuff that gets public attention is the control opposition like Beyond Nuclear and Greenpeace and Environmental Progress and the rest of the degenerate scumbags. There's very few people out there. Have a great night. We'll see everybody on the other side for tomorrow night. Same time as usual. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. And thank you again, James. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Hugs, folks. Take care.